A scarred man, his soul echoing the emptiness of the prairie, bought a condemned woman and her 2 trembling children, until he realized he hadn't purchased a debt, but unearthed a love more resilient than the land itself. The sun beat down on Dust Devil Creek with merciless intensity, baking the parched earth and the spirits of those unfortunate enough to be caught in its glare. Upon a makeshift auction block, a rickety platform of old crates, stood Sarah Matthews, her faded calico dress clinging to her slender frame, a testament to hardship and lost dignity. Beside her, clutching her skirt with tiny, desperate hands, were her twins, Lily and Tom, no more than 5 summers old, their wide eyes reflecting a terror too profound for tears. Dust, gritty and relentless, coated everything, the worn leather of men's boots, the sagging porches of the clapboard buildings, and the hearts of the onlookers, a gallery of harsh faces and whispered judgments. Sarah's late husband, Thomas, a man charmed by the siren song of dice and cards, had left behind nothing but his name and a crushing debt to Silas Blackwood, a man whose girth was matched only by his avarice. Now, Blackwood, his face flushed with cheap whiskey and self-importance, paced before Sarah, his voice a gravelly rasp that cut through the oppressive heat. "This woman, Sarah Matthews," he bellowed, gesturing with a meaty hand, "and her 2 brats, are offered today to settle the considerable debts of her worthless husband. What am I bid for her indenture?" "Strong back, good for mending, cooking, whatever a man might require." His leering gaze swept over Sarah, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl, but her face remained a mask of stoic resolve, only the faintest tremor in her clasped hands betraying the storm within. She would not weep. Not here. Not for them. She was a mother, and her children drew their courage from hers. The crowd murmured, a mixture of pity, scorn, and morbid curiosity. They knew Thomas's folly, and in this unforgiving land, a woman alone, burdened with children and debt, was little more than flotsam on a cruel tide. Sarah felt their stares like stones, each one a fresh bruise on her already battered spirit. She focused on the horizon, a shimmering line where the endless sky met the unforgiving earth, praying for an escape that seemed impossible, a miracle in a town that had long ago forgotten the meaning of the word. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale beer, and the dry, choking dust that defined their existence, a constant reminder of the barrenness that threatened to consume them all. At the edge of the murmuring crowd, half hidden in the scant shade of the blacksmith's lean-to, stood Elias Thorne. His face, weathered by sun and sorrow, was a study in stoic endurance, his eyes the color of a winter sky, holding a loneliness that mirrored the vast, empty plain surrounding his isolated ranch, Thorne's Hollow. A slight, almost imperceptible limp in his gait spoke of old pains, both physical and buried deep within his soul, a constant echo of the day he had lost everything that mattered. He had come to town for supplies, a rare journey from the solitude that had become his only companion since Martha and little Daniel were taken by the fever years ago. He hadn't intended to witness this brutal spectacle, this bartering of human flesh. His first instinct was to turn away, to retreat to the quiet desolation of his ranch where such ugliness couldn't touch him. His own grief was a heavy cloak, and the world outside his fences held little appeal. But then he saw the children, their small faces pale and streaked with dust, their eyes fixed on their mother with a desperate, unwavering trust. He saw his own Daniel in Tom's defiant little chin, his Martha in Lily's frightened, clinging hands. A forgotten chamber in his heart, long sealed by loss, began to ache with a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. Silas Blackwood was escalating his vile pitch, his words growing coarser, more suggestive. $10 for the lot. A bargain for a sturdy woman and 2 young ones who'll be earning their keep in no time. A rough-looking trapper guffawed, raising a grimy hand. Elias felt a cold fury rise within him, a protective instinct he thought had died with his family. He straightened, his tall frame casting a long shadow as he moved. The crowd parted slightly, surprised by his presence. Elias Thorne rarely involved himself in town affairs. He pushed through, his limp more noticeable as he strode towards the block, his expression unreadable. He stopped before Blackwood, his quiet presence a stark contrast to the auctioneer's bluster. "How much?" Elias's voice was rusty from disuse, yet it carried a surprising weight, cutting through Blackwood's patter, to clear her husband's debt entirely. To own the paper, not the person. Blackwood, momentarily stunned, narrowed his eyes. "Thorne?" "What business is it of yours?" Elias ignored him. "The full sum." "Name it." Blackwood, recovering his swagger and sensing an unexpected windfall, named a figure that was extortionate, nearly double the actual debt, enough to make several men in the crowd whistle softly. It was a sum that would cripple most settlers. Elias didn't flinch. He reached into his worn leather pouch, the one containing the meager savings he'd painstakingly accumulated, the funds meant for a new bull, for repairs to his failing fences. Without a word, he counted out the tarnished coins and crumpled bills, placing them into Blackwood's greedy, outstretched hand. The silence was absolute, save for the clink of currency. Blackwood, though sneering, couldn't refuse. "Sold," he grunted, stuffing the money into his vest. Elias turned his gaze, not to Sarah, but to the dust at her feet. He gave a curt nod, a silent command. "Come," he said, the single word hanging in the stunned air. Then, without a backward glance at the silenced crowd or the fuming Blackwood, he turned and began the slow walk towards his waiting wagon, expecting them to follow. The journey to Thorn's Hollow was a long, silent passage across a landscape that seemed to swallow them whole. Sarah sat stiffly on the wagon seat, Lily pressed against one side, Tom the other, their small bodies rigid with unspoken anxieties. Elias Thorne drove the horses with a steady hand, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead, his profile as unyielding as the distant mesas. The silence was thick, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic plodding of the horses. Sarah stole glances at him, searching for clues, for any hint of the man who had just expended a small fortune for strangers. His face revealed nothing. Was he kind, or merely eccentric? A savior, or another kind of captor? Her fear, though momentarily quelled by the escape from Blackwood, now resurfaced, shapeless and clinging. Thorn's Hollow, when they finally reached it, was as isolated as its owner. A small, weathered cabin stood against a backdrop of stark hills, a curl of smoke whispering from its stone chimney. A larger, more dilapidated barn sagged nearby, and fences struggled to maintain their boundaries against the encroaching wilderness. It was a place of profound solitude, almost melancholic, yet there was a raw, untamed beauty to it, a sense of resilience. Elias gestured towards a smaller, secondary cabin, little more than a one-room shelter, set a short distance from the main house. "You and the children will stay there," he stated, his voice flat. "There's a cot, some blankets." "I'll bring wood and water." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight for words. The cabin was sparse, the air inside cool and smelling faintly of dust and disuse. But it was clean, and crucially, it was a lockable door between her family and this stranger. In the days that followed, Sarah worked with a quiet desperation, determined to earn her keep, to prove her worth beyond the sum Elias had paid. She cleaned the small cabin until it shone, mended the children's clothes with thread pulled from her own worn petticoat, and coaxed a meager stew from the supplies Elias silently left on their doorstep each morning: flour, beans, sometimes a piece of salt pork. She discovered a neglected vegetable patch behind the main cabin and began to tend it, her hands finding solace in the soil. The children, sensing their mother's unease, remained subdued, shadows clinging to her skirt, their voices hushed. Elias Thorne remained a distant figure. He observed her efforts from afar, his expression unreadable. He never spoke of the debt, never made demands. His kindness, when it came, was unspoken, practical. An extra pile of firewood appeared when the nights grew colder. A small, roughly carved wooden bird, smoothed by touch, was left on the cabin step for Lily, followed by a miniature, equally simple horse for Tom. When a sudden downpour revealed a leak in her cabin roof, she awoke the next morning to find it expertly patched. These small, silent gestures were pebbles dropped into the deep well of her fear, sending out ripples of cautious hope. She was still afraid, but a fragile sense of security began to take root, as tentative and tenacious as the single, bright yellow wildflower she noticed one morning, pushing its way through a crack in the dusty wood of her cabin steps. She had not been touched, not been threatened. She had simply been sheltered. Weeks bled into a month, the rhythm of their isolated existence settling into a quiet pattern of shared space and unspoken understandings. The late summer sun began to soften, the evenings carrying a new coolness that hinted at the approaching autumn. One such evening, after the children were finally asleep in the small cabin, lulled by the chirping of crickets, Sarah found Elias sitting by a small, crackling fire he'd built between the two dwellings. The flames cast dancing shadows on his weathered face, softening its usual austerity. An impulse, born of growing trust and the desperate need for connection, made her step out into the twilight. She approached him hesitantly, clutching her shawl tighter. "Mr. Thorne?" He looked up, his expression uncharacteristically open in the firelight. "Sarah," he gestured to a nearby log. She sat, the warmth of the fire a welcome comfort. For a long moment, they watched the flames in silence, a shared ritual of quiet contemplation. It was Sarah who finally broke it, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. "Why, Mr. Thorne? Why did you do it?" That day in town, it was a great deal of money. Elias poked at the fire with a stick, the embers flaring briefly. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice low and raspy, he began to speak, the words coming slowly, as if dredged from a deep, painful well. "I had a wife," he said, his gaze fixed on the flames, "Martha. And a son, Daniel. He was about your Tom's age." He paused, the silence heavy with unspoken grief. "Mountain fever took them both. One winter, quick and cruel." He swallowed hard. "This ranch, it was supposed to be our future. After they were gone, it just became a reminder. Empty." He touched his leg, the one with the limp. "Rode for the doctor. Too hard, too fast. Horse stumbled. By the time I got back, it was too late for Daniel." Martha followed a week later, his voice cracked on her name. "I couldn't save them." The admission hung in the cool night air, raw and devastating. Sarah's heart ached for him, for the profound loss that shadowed his every movement. Seeing his vulnerability, a dam within her own soul seemed to break. "My husband, Thomas," she began, her own voice trembling slightly, "he wasn't always a bad man. But the gambling, it took hold of him, twisted him. He chased losses, hoping for a win that never came." She looked down at her hands, twisting her apron. "The debt. I lived in fear of it, of what would happen to Lily and Tom. My own parents, they gave me away when I was small. I never wanted my children to feel that abandonment, that terror of being unwanted, a burden." She confessed her shame, the humiliation of being sold like chattel, the crushing weight of feeling invisible, defined only by her husband's failures and her own desperate poverty. The fire crackled, a soft counterpoint to their shared confessions. In that quiet space, beside the warmth of the flames, two solitary souls, battered by life's cruelties, had found a fragile bridge of understanding. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something perhaps even more profound, the silent acknowledgement of shared pain, the first tentative stitches mending the torn fabric of trust. The fragile piece of their shared existence, nurtured by quiet kindness and whispered confessions, was shattered with the sudden, brutal arrival of an early blizzard. One morning, the sky, which had been a clear, crisp blue, turned a bruised, ominous gray. By afternoon, the wind howled like a starving wolf, driving sheets of snow horizontally across the plains, erasing the horizon, isolating Thorne's Hollow in a swirling vortex of white. They had been preparing for winter, but not this soon, not this ferociously. The temperature plummeted, and the small cabins offered scant protection against the biting cold. Elias worked tirelessly, securing the barn, checking on the few livestock he possessed, reinforcing the doors and windows against the storm's fury. Sarah, equally driven by a primal need to protect her young, helped as best she could, herding the children into the slightly larger main cabin with Elias at his insistence, conserving firewood, rationing their dwindling supplies. Then, disaster struck. Little Tom, who had been coughing for a day, woke in the night with a raging fever. His small body burned, his breathing shallow and rapid. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Sarah. Elias, seeing the boy's distress, felt a chilling echo of his own past helplessness, the ghost of his son Daniel's suffering rising to haunt him. The storm raged outside, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within the cabin. No doctor could be reached, they were utterly alone. It was then, in the crucible of fear and desperation, that Sarah's hidden strength emerged. "There are herbs," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through Elias's grim silence. "My grandmother, she knew things. Feverfew, willow bark. I saw some yarrow growing by the creek bed last week. It might help." Elias looked at her, seeing a resolve he hadn't known she possessed. The creek was a dangerous trek in this storm, but the alternative, watching Tom succumb, was unthinkable. "I'll go," he said, reaching for his heavy coat. "No," Sarah insisted, her eyes meeting his, fierce and determined. "You wouldn't know what to look for." "I have to." "You keep the fire strong, keep him warm." Before he could argue further, she had bundled herself in every spare piece of cloth they had, a determined set to her jaw. Elias, torn between his instinct to protect her and the desperate hope she offered, finally nodded, his heart heavy with a familiar dread. He watched her disappear into the white maelstrom, a small, courageous figure battling the elements. While she was gone, he tended to Tom, his rough hand surprisingly gentle as he bathed the boy's forehead with cool water, fighting back his own rising despair. Sarah returned hours later, half frozen, her face raw from the wind, but clutching a small pouch of precious roots and leaves. Her intuition, a deep, almost uncanny connection to the land, had guided her through the blinding snow to the plants she sought. Together, they brewed a bitter tea, coaxing small sips past Tom's parched lips. Sarah crushed leaves, making a poultice for his chest, her movements deft and sure. Elias could only watch, humbled by her quiet competence, her fierce maternal love, and this unexpected, almost mystical knowledge. He saw not the souled woman, but a healer, a woman of profound strength, battling for her child's life with the wisdom of generations. The storm raged on, but within the cabin, a different kind of battle was being waged, one of hope against despair, of ancient knowledge against the raw power of nature. The blizzard finally exhausted itself after 3 relentless days, leaving Thorn's Hollow buried under a thick blanket of pristine, unforgiving snow. The world outside was silent, muffled, breathtakingly beautiful in its starkness. Inside the main cabin, a fragile quiet also reigned. Tom's fever had broken. He was weak, pale, but his breathing was easier, his eyes clear when he woke. Sarah, exhausted but relieved, slumped by his makeshift bed, her hand resting on his small forehead. Elias watched them, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him, mixed with a newfound respect for this resilient woman who had faced down the storm and death itself to save her child. A tentative peace settled over them, a sense of shared victory against overwhelming odds. But the respite was short-lived. Just as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a dazzling light on the snow-covered landscape, a new threat appeared on the horizon, 3 dark figures on horseback, laboriously making their way towards the ranch. As they drew closer, Elias's stomach tightened. He recognized the portly figure in the lead, Silas Blackwood. He was flanked by 2 rough-looking men, hired muscle by their thuggish appearance. Blackwood, it seemed, had not forgotten his perceived grievance. He had likely waited for the worst of the weather to pass, perhaps assuming they would be weakened, vulnerable. Elias met them outside, his stance deceptively casual, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Blackwood," he greeted, his voice low. "What do you want?" Blackwood, dismounting with a grunt, sneered. "Thorn. I've been thinking about our little transaction." "That sum you paid?" "That was merely for her seasonal labor. The debt itself is still outstanding. Or perhaps, seeing as you seem to have taken a fancy to the woman, you'd be willing to pay a more appropriate price for full ownership." He eyed the cabin where Sarah had appeared in the doorway, her face pale but resolute, Lily and Tom peeking out from behind her skirts. Alternatively, Blackwood continued, his gaze lingering on the children, "a strong boy like that one could work off his father's debt in my logging camp." Or perhaps the girl. The implication was vile, and a muscle twitched in Elias's jaw. He had spent his life since Martha and Daniel's death avoiding conflict, shunning violence. A youthful brawl that had gone too far, leaving another man badly injured, and Elias with a deep-seated aversion to his own strength, had cemented his solitary existence. He preferred the quiet toil of the ranch to the unpredictable chaos of men. But Blackwood was threatening more than just his peace. He was threatening this fragile sanctuary, this nascent family he had unknowingly begun to build. The fear in Sarah's eyes, the way Lily pressed closer to her mother, ignited a protective rage in Elias that overrode his ingrained reluctance. This was not a bar fight over pride, this was a fight for their lives, for their future. His past trauma warred with his present duty, but looking at Sarah, standing bravely before her children, he knew there was no choice. He would not let Blackwood take them. He would not let the darkness win. Silas Blackwood, emboldened by Elias's initial silence, which he mistook for weakness, swaggered closer. "So, Thorn? What'll it be? More money, or do I take the brats as collateral?" One of his thugs let out a coarse laugh, stepping forward menacingly. Lily, startled by the sudden movement and harsh sound, let out a small, terrified cry that pierced the cold air like a shard of glass. That tiny sound was the spark that ignited Elias's long-dormant fury. The memory of his own lost child, the helplessness he'd felt then, transformed into a white-hot resolve. He moved with a speed that belied his limp, his years of solitary labor having conditioned him into a man of surprising strength. He didn't reach for a gun, his battle was more primal. He grabbed a heavy piece of firewood from the stack near the door, its weight familiar in his hand. The first thug, caught off guard by Elias's sudden ferocity, stumbled back as Elias swung, the wood connecting with a sickening thud against the man's side. He went down with a grunt of pain. The second thug charged, knife glinting, but Elias, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to protect, met him head-on. It wasn't a skilled fight, it was raw, brutal, a desperate defense of hearth and home. He took a blow to the jaw that sent stars exploding behind his eyes, another to his ribs that stole his breath, but he didn't yield. He fought with the tenacity of a cornered wolf, his quiet strength erupting into a force of nature. While Elias grappled with the second man, Blackwood, ever the coward, saw his opportunity and lunged for Lily, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Come here, you little wench," he snarled. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure, maternal rage, and threw herself in front of her daughter. In that terrifying moment, her fear transmuted into ferocious courage. Remembering a pressure point her grandmother had once shown her for subduing aggressive animals, or perhaps guided by sheer instinct, she jabbed her stiffened fingers hard into the side of Blackwood's thick neck. He yelped, his grip on Lily faltering as a jolt of unexpected pain shot through him. Simultaneously, she kicked out, her worn boot connecting solidly with his shin. Blackwood howled, stumbling back, momentarily disabled. This gave Elias the opening he needed. He dispatched the second thug with a final, desperate blow and turned on Blackwood, his face a mask of cold fury. He subdued the whimpering, blustering man quickly, then, with Sarah's help, they used ropes from the barn to tie Blackwood and his incapacitated men securely. Standing over them, breathing heavily, Elias knew he couldn't take them to Dust Devil Creek, the town's justice was too easily bought. He would take them to the territorial marshal, miles away, ensuring they faced true retribution. When the immediate threat was neutralized, a profound silence descended, broken only by their ragged breaths and Lily's soft sobs. Elias turned to Sarah, his face bruised, his body aching, but his eyes holding a new light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn wooden carving, a little bluebird, its paint faded, its wings poised for flight. "Martha," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "she loved bluebirds. Said they were a sign of happiness. Daniel, our son, he carved this for her, not long before." He couldn't finish the sentence. He held the fragile bird out to Sarah, its delicate form resting in his calloused palm. "This ain't much, Sarah. But I choose you. And Lily. And Tom. Not to keep, like some possession. But to build with. To share this life with. If you'll have this place, and me." It wasn't a proposal in the conventional sense, but a heartfelt offering of partnership, of shared futures, of a home forged in adversity. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming gratitude and a dawning, wondrous love. She reached out and gently took the bluebird, her fingers brushing his. "Yes, Elias," she whispered. "Yes." 1 year transformed Thorn's Hollow. The harsh winds of the previous autumn had given way to a spring bursting with improbable life, and now, as summer painted the prairie in hues of gold and amber, the ranch itself reflected the healing that had taken place within its fences. It was no longer Thorns Hollow, a name steeped in solitude and sorrow, but Bluebird Ranch, a testament to new beginnings and the quiet happiness that had taken root there. Flowers, coaxed from the stubborn soil by Sarah's patient hands, bloomed in vibrant patches around the main cabin, their colors a defiant song against the muted tones of the landscape. The small cabin where Sarah and the children had first stayed was now a well-stocked pantry and herb drying room, its repaired roof a symbol of the care that permeated every corner of their shared lives. The main house, once filled with the ghosts of Elias's past, now echoed with the sounds of a living family, Lily's bright laughter as she chased butterflies, Tom's excited chatter as he followed Elias on his daily rounds, learning the rhythms of the land. Sarah's innate gift for healing, once a hidden secret, had blossomed. News of her skills, carried by travelers and the occasional grateful rancher she'd aided, had slowly spread. The people of Dust Devil Creek, who had once scorned her as the sold woman, now spoke of Sarah of Bluebird Ranch with a mixture of awe and respect. They had heard how she and Elias had faced down Silas Blackwood, who, along with his thugs, had been taken away by the territorial marshal and had not been seen since. They saw the transformation in the once barren ranch, the health of her children, the quiet contentment that now softened Elias Thorne's stern features. Mothers with sick children, old men with aching joints, began to make the journey to Bluebird Ranch, seeking not just remedies, but the gentle compassion that radiated from Sarah. She never turned anyone away, her quiet strength and intuitive wisdom earning her a place of honor in a community that had once cast her out. Elias, too, was a changed man. The deep lines of grief around his eyes had softened, often crinkling now with a gentle smile. His limp, though still present, seemed less a mark of old sorrow and more a reminder of the journey that had brought him to this unexpected happiness. He and Sarah were partners in every sense, their lives interwoven like the strong, resilient vines that now climbed the porch trellis. They worked side by side, their days filled with shared tasks and quiet companionship, their evenings often spent on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, the carved bluebird resting on the railing, a silent sentinel of their enduring bond. They were not bound by a preacher's words or a legal document, but by a commitment far deeper, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by mutual respect and a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. The children, Lily and Tom, were the truest testament to the healing power of Bluebird Ranch. No longer the silent, fearful shadows who had arrived clinging to their mother's skirts, they were now vibrant, inquisitive youngsters, their spirits as free as the prairie wind. Lily, with her mother's gentle eyes and intuitive nature, had become Sarah's little apprentice, her small hand surprisingly deft at sorting herbs and tending the flower beds. She had a special affinity for animals, calming the skittish new foal with a soft word and a gentle touch, much like her mother soothed the anxieties of the people who sought her help. Tom, sturdy and adventurous, was Elias's constant companion. He followed the quiet man everywhere, mimicking his purposeful stride, his small face serious as he absorbed the lessons of the ranch, how to mend a fence, how to read the clouds for signs of rain, how to listen to the whispers of the land. Elias, in turn, found a quiet joy in the boy's eager company, the questions and observations filling a silence he hadn't realized was so profound until it was broken by a child's voice, a voice that sometimes, in its earnest tones, reminded him so achingly of Daniel, yet now without the sharp stab of pain, only a gentle wistfulness. Elias, who had once communicated in grunts and nods, now found himself explaining the ways of the wild to an eager young mind, sharing stories of his own boyhood on a different, greener farmstead far away. He taught Sarah, too. He showed her how to handle the ledgers, a task she took to with surprising aptitude, ensuring their small ranch ran efficiently. He taught her to ride astride, not side-saddle, and she discovered a thrilling sense of freedom galloping across the open land, the wind in her hair, her laughter echoing Elias's quiet chuckle. In return, Sarah taught Elias the subtle language of the plants, the signs of healing, the importance of patience and nurturing. She showed him how the most delicate bloom could possess the greatest strength, much like the human spirit. Their partnership was a quiet dance of shared knowledge and mutual support, each strengthening the other. One afternoon, a wagon approached, carrying a worried couple from a distant homestead, their young daughter pale and listless with a lingering cough that no town doctor had been able to ease. Sarah welcomed them, her calm presence instantly soothing the parents' anxiety. She examined the child gently, then prepared a syrup from honey and wild cherry bark she had carefully harvested. Within days, the child was visibly improving. The mother, a woman named Agnes who had once been among the sharpest tongues in Dust Devil Creek, returned with a beautifully stitched quilt, its pattern a vibrant array of wildflowers. "For you, Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For your kindness. We misjudged you." Sarah accepted the gift with a gracious smile, understanding the apology held within the offering. The bluebirds, too, seemed to have adopted the ranch as their own. They nested in the eaves of the barn, their cheerful songs a constant melody, their flashes of brilliant blue a daily reminder of the happiness that had been so unexpectedly found, so fiercely protected, and so gratefully embraced. Elias Thorne and Sarah Matthews, along with Lily and Tom, discovered far more than just a haven from the harshness of the world. They cultivated a resilience born from the fertile ground of shared sorrows and nurtured a love built upon the quiet, steadfast promise of each new dawn. Their intertwined lives became a testament, etched into the vast canvas of the frontier, that even in the most desolate wilderness of despair, hope, tended with courage and watered by acceptance, can take root and blossom with astonishing beauty. Their story echoes the profound truth that a person is not irrevocably defined by the shadows of their past, nor by the cruel labels a judgmental society may thrust upon them. Instead, true character is forged in the crucible of choice, in the courageous decisions to reach out, to protect, to heal, and to dare to nurture love in the face of adversity. It proves that a family is not solely built on blood, but on the unbreakable bonds of shared experience, unwavering support, and the quiet comfort of belonging. If the journey of Elias, Sarah, Lily, and Tom from their individual brokenness to a shared, vibrant wholeness has resonated within your heart, if their tale of quiet strength and enduring love has touched a chord within your spirit, we invite you to show your support for stories that illuminate the best of humanity. Please, take a moment to like this video, to share their inspiring story of resilience and redemption with others who might find solace or inspiration in its telling. And we humbly ask you to subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope, courage, and the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to heal, to grow, and, like a wildflower pushing through the hardest stone, to always find its way to reach for the warmth of the sun.